Well, good morning to everybody at Fort Benning. Hopefully the audio is coming through loud and clear. My name is Brigadier General Pat Ellis. I'm the Chief of Staff at First Corps. And on behalf of Lieutenant General Brunson, who couldn't be here today, I want to really thank you for the opportunity to talk briefly about kind of the First Corps and the Army role a little bit out here in the Pacific. The timing couldn't be any better today, honestly, as I'm coming to you from south of Bangkok, Thailand, where I'm forward with one of our command nodes for Cobra Gold. We've got our Corps main is set up in a old high school gym on Navy Base Guam, and we've got a rear station set up at home. So we're starting to practice the things that I'll talk about today with our distributed mission command nodes that we've got spread across the theater. Not to insult anyone's intelligence, the Pacific's a big theater. It's certainly a complex theater, large amounts of water. Unlike Europe, where once you get to the continent, you can load equipment and people and things up on rail and move them. We don't have the ability out here in the Pacific. So traditionally, it's been thought of as a naval and an air-centric theater. And I think that's certainly still true. It takes us time to transit. It takes us, naval vessels to move and Army watercraft to move our equipment and our people around the environment. But as USAPAC reminds us frequently, is that wars may start at sea, but they finish on the land. So this summer, as we got a new kind of chain of command across the board, as Admiral Aquilino came in at Indo-PACOM and asked us, challenged us to think and act differently out here in the Pacific. General Flynn came into the United States Army Pacific, and if you know General Flynn is a force of nature, really knew where he wanted to drive us, challenge the Corps to become his operational headquarters in the Pacific and to get out and be present in the Pacific. And then as General Brunson came on board, who had a lot of understanding from his time at 7th Infantry Division of what it meant to work and live and exercise here in the Pacific, challenged us to figure out how we were going to get out more and how we were going to be more present in the theater and how we needed to adjust the way that we were prepared to fight out here in the Pacific. So as we started this process, we tried to examine how the Corps can contribute in the AOR. Obviously, if it's a Navy and Air Force centric theater, we've got to work, meter our contributions and figure out how the Army can help in the AOR. The things that we saw certainly as a Corps level role, the targeting process, the feed into the joint targeting process, our ability to plug into that, our ability to run targets from subordinate divisions back up into the joint process. We saw that as a key Corps role. We also saw the enablement of land and naval forces as a key role. Obviously, that's through the execution of that targeting process and getting things in the right position to execute land-based targeting, and also with, as we saw last summer in Pacific Century, as the PRISM missile comes online for the HIMARS, is the ability to actually target ships from the land, which became a critical capability we used in some of our planning and some of our the CPXs that we've run in recent history. And then also as a Corps, of course, we look to provide command and control out here. We are tasked to be a JTF for Indo-PACOM. And in fact, what we're doing now, part of what we're doing now is going through our JTF certification with the node in Guam and the node forward here. We're also tasked to be a CFLIC for USAPAC if they're a JTF or another JTF in the AOR. Then we also have the traditional Corps role that we could provide to the theater as well. And then also, from an Army front, really looked logistics is a heavy requirement. The Joint Force looks to the Army, even out here in the Pacific, to provide them some joint logistics. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we think we're going to enable that in a few minutes. But these are all things that we thought the Corps needed to be able to contribute inside of the AOR. And as we looked at that, those are all mission command related. So really the Corps' main contribution here is going to be on the mission command and control kind of front here. And we made some conclusions about that in the AOR as we went through our staffing process. One, we've got to be present in the AOR. We've got to be physically present west of the international date line. We've got to be virtually present when we can't be physically present, whether that's a continual presence or whether that's rotational at peak periods. We're working through that, but we know that we've got to be physically here to be in the AOR, because what happens when conflict starts, it's going to be really hard to get west of the international date line as things start to shut down and as adversaries start to target airfields and ports and facilities where we would offload. So if you're not already here, it's going to be really hard to get west in a fast fashion. We also, as we looked at the theater here, realized that the large nodes, kind of the doctrinal core structure of, 2 divisions up, 1 division back, and the main the TAC, the mobile command group, that doctrinal core structure was probably not what we were going to need. We need to be scalable because that scalability and size enables us to be a little bit more agile to get west of the IDL. And also it enables us to be a little bit more survivable in the theater here. Because if you're conglomerated in big locations, as you know, most of the range rings for Chinese weapons can range us all the way out to Guam. So if we go big, we're going to be incredibly vulnerable and really not going to be very resilient. Because if one node goes, we're going to lose our capability. And then I think one of the bigger ones we saw is our contribution out here, is our conclusion that we drew is we've got to be able to solve joint problems in the AOR. So there's some joint challenges out here. You know, the Navy moving, doing their thing. For us in the Air Force has an agile combat employment, an ACE concept that they're working, where they look to scatter aircraft all around the Pacific in order to make them more survivable. But they're challenged with seizing those airfields, securing those airfields, providing logistical and fuel support, providing communication support, providing security to those airfields. We see those kind of things that's, for example, as a contribution that the Corps and the down trace divisions can enable here in the AOR. So as we looked at these conclusions, what we really started to develop and work towards was the nodal discussion that you see on the slide in front of you here. So this is a hypothetical AOR, obviously. JBLM is where it is, and Alaska is where it is, and so is Hawaii. But after that, it just becomes kind of a hypothetical. You see the core bullseye spread across the AOR. Each one of those is one of our subnodes, and I'll talk about how we're thinking about that and how we're approaching that here in a minute. If General Ryan's there, I apologize, sir. We left your headquarters there next to General Flynn in Hawaii. That's probably not where you'd want to be, but we thought we'd just leave you on there for representative meetings here and put Van Antwerp forward there with the division TAC in that hypothetical island. But as we're looking at this, as we wanted to perform mission command forward, we needed to spread it all out. And we aren't tied to fixed locations. And I'll talk about how we're thinking about those locations in a second. But we are spreading out we think between 3 and 5 nodes is what our minimum requirement will be in order to be effective here and contribute the things that I talked about in the conclusions above. The way we're approaching this internal to First Corps is we're taking a whole staff approach. If you look at those dotted lines between each one of those nodes, it's a clear understanding that, there's some kind of electronic connection between those. We're sharing information. We're talking over those networks. But that's not all of it. There's a huge whole of staff approach here. The days of throwing the hand mic at the G6 and saying, fix this are kind of over here as we looked at how do we build a network, a resilient network out here in the Pacific, and a network that other folks can come and plug into that is resilient and that enables us to do the tasks that we think we need to do. So here's how we're approaching this solution. There's really 6 things across the staff that we're approaching this with. The first is structure. We're looking at what the nodes are structured, what the staff organization is. We're basically taking the standard core MCoE that we've got, and we're de-aggregating that. We're pulling all the pieces apart and then reassembling those things to form smaller nodes that we can move across the area, the AOR. And honestly, that's certainly not a G6. That's not a G6 problem. That's actually a chief issue. As the chief of staff, that's the thing. I'm the OPR for the staff structure, making sure we got the right people in the right nodes, because that cuts across the entire staff enterprise. The second thing we're working towards is the form factor for this. So we have the ability we have the equipment. We've got all the tents and the bergs that all corps have to stand up a big core command and control node, the doctrinal one. But we're also working now to build smaller nodes in different form factors that the commander can elect. We need to be what Indo-PACOM needs us to be. So if we got to go small, we can go small. Probably our smallest node now, and we'll talk more about it in some of the other the discussion later, is we've got 4 strikers that were due to leave with some of the on the move upgrades that were due to leave. One of the subunits at 7 ID, we were able to secure those. We've got a 4 striker package that has a bunch of core mission command systems on top of it, integrated into the system, and that's a node of about 20 people and pretty robust communication capability. We've got the ability to go with small footprint to a couple of guys with an exec comm kit like I have here, to go in a high school gym, to go in attack, to go afloat. I can talk about that. We currently have a C2 node set up on a vessel in Guam, as we're working through some of this experimentation. So we can do it all from small form factor to large form factor. And we should talk about form factors as well. We're also working on in-route mission command, because the distances are so great here. Even if you're flying on a C-17, it can take you, from 8 to 10 hours to get to where you need to in the Pacific. And being able to stay situationally aware, to be able to receive and pass targeting data, to be able to perform mission command functions in flight as part of the form factor that we're looking at as well. And we're not there yet, but the Strikers should be able to plug into the side of the aircraft and pull services. On the flight to Guam, where we moved the EECP Striker, the Early Entry Command Post Striker, a couple of weeks ago, we were able to plug into the aircraft, but not necessarily through the vehicles. We're working towards that. I think that would be our eventual solution. But as we look at the form factors, tents, buildings, whatever, that's really a G3 function based on the structure that we come up with, and then having the G3 and the ops sergeant major come back and say, okay, this is the package we need for that. And our goal is to build it so it's plug and play, that we can look at it and say, okay, today we need the tent package, tomorrow we need the Striker package. Hey, we're going to put this package here in a high school gym like we've got in Guam right now. Gives us the ability to pick multiple form factors. The third thing we're looking at is data and applications. That is a G6 function for sure. Kind of the way we talk about it, though, is that, amateurs talk tactics, experts may talk logistics, but the modern military professional probably needs to talk ones and zeros. So the data that we need for the staff to do their job, the applications we need to do their job, is something that the G6 is working towards, taking existing applications and existing programs, CPCE, FATATs, those existing systems, and figuring out how to handle those, how to handle the information that goes along with those things. We're building towards a cloud-based solution here, and I can certainly talk a lot more about that if folks are interested. But as we put some of this capability in the cloud, what we started how to look at is how much data do you need with you. So when if you're using the cloud for information and you get cut off, if you're in Guam and that node gets severed from the satellites go down, how much do you need to continue to do your function over lower TI? Do you need 3 days? Do you need all your targeting data? Do you need location data? How much of that stuff do you need to bring forward? And that's the G6 is helping us think through that, but the staff is feeding into that process to say, well, I'm the G1, I need this information to do my job. Well, I'm the G3, I need this information. So we're going back through and having actually do form flow analysis on what data we need, how much of it we need, and when we think we're going to need it. And then the second one that's in the G6 world, my fourth one that we're looking at here is transport. And that's really G6 and our signal brigade is looking at how we're flowing that data back. If you start talking about cloud computing, in order to effectively use the cloud, you've got to be able to reach it. So if all of your cloud information is based in the United States, which ours will not be, but if it was, the transport of how you reach back into that cloud becomes incredibly important. We're becoming, as a core, more transport agnostic. We're not looking to not solely be tied to the military transport or necessarily just the civilian, but there's the Starlink capability that folks are starting to experiment with. We've got a couple terminals here. I know 18th has some of those forward already in Europe, excuse me. We've got the low Earth orbit stuff. We've got the mid Earth orbit stuff. We've got commercial connections. We've got a lot of abilities to reach the same data over different paths. And that's the transport agnosticism that we're working towards as a core. In fact, we'll talk about the vessel in a minute, but we're using Navy systems to access that same information over Navy satellites or Navy bandwidth back into the Army system that gets us back into the States. We've been able to do it over joint capability, over civilian capability as well. So the transport is a hard piece of this because it really, the web on here, every one of these dotted lines doesn't really work if you don't have that transport. And we know we may not have permanent access, assured access all the time to it, but you've got to have a reasonable certainty that you're going to be able to see and talk across all those locations. The next one we talk about as we look at this as a staff is the location. And that's the physical geography of where we go. And the G5 is the lead for this. And the discussion is, where can we go? Where should we go? Where do we need to invest? We use exercise authorities to get into certain locations for short periods of time, but where do we need to go long term? And as a core, we're not tied to any one specific location because we clearly understand that in conflict or even in competition, nations have a vote on who comes into their land and who's based there. So we could get told, no, thank you for this one. Access, basing, and overflight is something that we have to work through every time we move onto the land. The mobile nodes afloat give us some flexibility there. That location, obviously, if you're on a ship, you can go where you need to. But the physical location on the ground is something that G5 is working on. And we're starting to invest time, resources, and energy into that. Site surveys have started to go out to places like Palau and other locations just to see what would it take, how much, the basic PDSS book that comes back and says, okay, General Brunson, you've been told to execute this mission. We think it needs this many nodes. Here's the places we think we can go. Okay, here's the prep, here's the cost, here's how much equipment we need to bring with us if we go to each one of those locations. And then the last, the kind of the sixth and final thing that the staff is working on, that we're working on as a team on this one is, and this is for everybody, I'm kind of the lead for this, is the chief refereeing this one is the process. And this is really the hardest piece of the puzzle that we're finding. Part of the process is the authorities, the policies, just basic network stuff. I know there's division commanders there. They've had the same fights about how do you get through the regional hub nodes and how do you skip through the different communication centers. There's a lot of firewalls, and those nodes have an obligation to protect the network, understandably, but there's a lot of work that goes into just getting through there and getting connected. As an example, we were able to get up on the satellite with our STT and our JNN in about 30 hours. But it took us almost 7 additional days in Guam to get all the policies straight to actually allow the data to begin flowing all the way back to JPLM. That's part of the process, and we're working through that. There's going to be actually a TTX in 2 weeks in Hawaii to help us work through some of those authorities and approvals to do that. But the hardest part, I think, about the process as we talk about it is really the distributed staff work. As we look at these nodes, we've got a sustainment node up on Random Island. We've got a persistent node that was already there, division tax forward. Really, as we're breaking this down, what we're finding is we're going to end up about 3 to 5 nodes. So there's kind of a current ops node. There'll be a sustainment heavy node. There'll be a future ops node, and there'll be a targeting node. And those nodes, what we're finding is the initial way we looked at this was we went with a red, white, and blue concept. So basically, if you're familiar, we did a talk 1, talk 2, talk 3 kind of concept where the commander and the primaries, and then there's the deputies, and then it was the deputies to the deputies. We realized that allowed us to build one big node forward, and that wasn't working for us. So we had to go back and go through the nodes that I just talked about by function. But like even in the sustainment node, as we look at it, there'll be the primary node for sustainment, providing sustainment support to the entire First Corps and down trace enterprise, but they're also going to have a small slice of targeting capability. They're also going to have a small slice of current ops capability. The targeting node will have a small slice of logistics. So although those nodes will have a primary responsibility, they'll also have some secondary responsibilities in the event that someone else is severed from the network, is dislocated or goes into the dislocated, intermittent, latent connections, and they're not able to provide that mission command out of the critical nodes. The targeting guys aren't able to do that. The sustainment node will actually pick up that targeting. That we're working through that now. We're not anywhere near ready full time, but we're working it now with 2 nodes. We've got the node here in Thailand and the node in Guam. We're already starting to have that discussions, and we're learning a ton. I mean, even just the basic stuff about time zones. What time are you operating on? We're across 5 time zones right now as we work as a Corps. So trying to get the battle rhythm built around that and how these nodes all interoperate. That's the challenge that we're working through there. So those 6 things that I talked about, that's kind of how we're approaching the problem here, how we're thinking about it, and really how are we actually trying to get there. We're experimenting as part of every exercise, and we're exercising where we're going to have to fight. So really a lot of our experimentation stuff is going to be in the same location where we're going to potentially have to fight. So unlike 18th, who has to be worldwide deployable, they're looking in multiple directions. We're looking at the Pacific, and we know this is where we're going to be. So we're working hard to solve the problems here, and we're using our experimentation, and we're using our exercises to get after this. So as we look at this, we've got about 1 exercise a quarter that we're able to pile this experimentation and this nodal concept on top of. So we're doing it now with Cobra Gold. We'll do it again this summer with another exercise in June. Courage Forger, which will be spread across the Pacific. And then we're actually going to execute this again as part of our Warfighter, which is a new thing for the Warfighter team there. They've been super supportive about it. It's going to challenge them. We're looking to put one node afloat up in the Puget Sound area. We'll have nodes at the training center. We'll have nodes at our home base node. We'll have a node in Yakima to actually stress these systems and try and run this for real. And obviously, we're really appreciative. General Brunson wanted to assume a lot of risk on, hey, there may be some challenges with communications. The tactical comms we're running on may impact, the outcome of the warfighter, and we're okay with that. It's a Pacific scenario, and General Brunson's given us, the go-ahead to work this as part of our warfighter. And we're excited to have Chuck Lombardo's team over top of us, helping us think through some of the things we just talked about. So after a couple of reps of this, we think we're going to be farther along, and then the warfighter will be a really good opportunity for us to shake out a lot of things. And our Corps commander, as I highlighted a second ago, really enables this experimentation. He's told us it's okay to fail, just fail forward, which is what we're working on every day, trying to solve some of these problems, and then trying to, we're spending some of his money to try and experiment with this stuff and reaching out to the Army and the CIO G6 to help us with some of the solutions. We're working hard with the other corps, also figuring out, learning from each other, and picking up a lot of the tools. So like I said, it's not business as usual for the Corps. As I talk about a couple of the initiatives that I think may interest folks, the first thing I probably need to talk about is the cloud experimentation. That's going on right now. Literally today, it's going on. We've rented space in the hyperscale Microsoft cloud, the Azure cloud. We have what's called a stack hub, which is kind of a medium-sized piece of the cloud that's currently parked in Guam. And then we've got a smaller piece of that cloud that's carved off, that's parked aboard the USNS City of Bismarck in the Apra Harbor at Naval Base Guam. And what the small pieces of the cloud do, they've allowed us to virtualize some of our mission command systems. So to talk about the very small node that's aboard the City of Bismarck, that particular piece of the cloud has virtualized FATADs in it, so that you don't have to have an FATADs box now to access FATADs. Yesterday, they were able to, using a secret Surface Pro, access that virtualized FATADs, perform digital fire missions back to the long-range hypersonic battery that's at JBLM. And that was happening actually from our system into the virtual piece, that little piece of the cloud, ingested into the Navy system, broadcast over Navy satellite, landing at a Navy location, dumped into the continental United States, cross-linked back into the Army system, and then forwarded back into JBLM for the long-range hypersonic guys to process that fire mission. That's pretty new for us. As you can imagine, there's a lot of what I call 3-foot walls. I think the G6 may call them steeper or taller walls than that, but 3-foot walls to climb over to get through that. We've been able to figure out that process now, done that once. And to jump to the bigger node that's in the high school gym with the rest of the main, that node is going to have a virtualized CPCE server on it, FATADS machines on there. And the goal with this experiment here is, as we get the pieces of the cloud and connect back into the Kona Space Cloud, the hyperscale, the Kona Space Cloud, we're going to, at certain points, be able to turn off access and then see what happens. Because one of the things we're having to work through is, how do you federate data? If both nodes are going through targeting data, and one of them is dislocated from the cloud, when you come back up onto the cloud, how do you actually federate that data back and forth? And that's something we're working through. The Microsoft engineers they were out on the boat yesterday, and they're in the high school gym today working through that exact kind of topic. So the cloud, we think, is going to enable all of this. Because you can't have assured access to Kona Space Cloud, we think these small slices of the cloud that we're going to bring forward with us are going to enable us to continue operations while we're forward. In addition to the cloud, because now actually, theoretically, I could use the SIPR machine I have here on Exec Comms Kit and access FATADs if I needed to, TAS, so I could get into CPCE. That capability allows you to access and actually physically manipulate information in those boxes. The same thing, we're also working hard, and I think we're actually the last corps to get on board with VJOC. I know that the 18th Airborne Corps has been using it for a while, and I think the 3rd Corps has it as well. We're getting on board with that, which would allow that to be displayed in multiple locations and not necessarily manipulated. So that's a kind of an interim fix until we get the whole cloud architecture built out. I think that's the interim fix that we're going with. The VJOC guys are going to be out next week to install a bunch of that stuff on our machines based out of Guam. I talked briefly about the Strikers. They're a kind of an in-route mission command platform. They're a small platform. They're a small node. We put a piece of the cloud inside the Strikers as well to enable targeting, to enable them to pull in Link 16 feeds. They've got the Link 16 radio where you can ingest targeting data from AWACS or P8s or pull it all into the box there and then dump it into the Army systems over the existing satellite infrastructure we've got there. We're starting to look at boats. I talked about the USNS City of Bismarck, which if you're familiar with the old Joint High-Speed Vessel program, that's what these are. The Army got out of the program and left it to the Navy, but it's got a pretty nice C4I suite. It feels like it was designed by the Army. It's about a 12-seat TAC location on the vessel. Zipper nipper already pre-wired, everything already in there. We're aboard that now, Pierside in Apra Harbor in Guam. And we're using that node as an exercise piece to run through a lot of this experimentation. We've also had the opportunity lately, because we were in Guam for about the previous 2 weeks before we came here to Thailand, is Expeditionary Sea Lift Base, which is a much bigger vessel. We've been aboard LPDs. We've been aboard littoral combat ships and had an opportunity to look at their spaces and now kind of a better understanding for what would and would not work for us, depending on what's available here. Again, not looking to become the Marine Corps, but if we're afloat, you can stay and you can do mission command while you're afloat. You can actually, one, stay up on the networks while you're moving from point A to point B. And then two, you can also now actually don't have to worry about as much about access basing and overflight requirements because you can do some of these mission command tasks forward, but you can just do them from the vessel. Then we're also looking at small nodes into the package, the exec comms package, or the tinier nodes where you can move small amounts of communications gear and people forward and do some of these mission command tasks. There's going to be more than enough work if something happens in the Pacific, more than enough work to go around. We're going to be spread literally all over the AOR. So we're looking at how do we scale the size of our nodes to make sure that we can provide not just LNOs, but LNOs with access to information so that now they're not just looking at a super screen, but they can actually see some of the CPCE feeds and things like that, and they can perform mission command functions while they're forward. But we're experimenting with what those nodes are actually going to do. The bigger part, the part that may interest more of the folks at Fort Benning, certainly some of the division commanders, is we're working hard with USERPAC to figure out how to build out the theater architecture to make it easier for ID, if General Hodney's there, when you come into Australia to plug into the network and to get into the cloud infrastructure. We're working, we know we're not there yet. We're trying to get the big pieces of it set so that when folks come forward, they're able to plug in relatively easily. As we heard from the 82nd, there was challenges with that when they went back in Afghanistan. I know that 18th Airborne Corps is working through some challenges in Europe right now. Like those are all hard problems. And as we redesign the architecture here, we've got to make it easier for folks to come into the theater and plug in. And of course, we're starting to work with the 25th already about some of these exact same topics. We're going to run some proofs of concept and spend some money to make sure that we can do it together. And then we're going to look at how to build out that theater architecture so that anybody who comes in can plug into that. And this wasn't designed to be a recruiting pitch, but certainly if there's folks out there that are interested in this kind of stuff and want to come work in the Pacific, I know that General Flynn and General Brunson would be happy to have you come out here. And with that, I will stand by for any questions or comments from the force out there. Well, I'll stand by for a few minutes if folks have questions, and if not, certainly appreciate the time today, and be glad to take any follow-up feedback that any of the team has there.
Sir, we have a question from the audience here.
Hey, sir, Major Ryan Whipple. I'm Major General Smith's XO. Hey, you talked about some of the systems that you had in the sustainment node, the mobile node, the persistent node.
Go ahead.
What are you doing to get after the training to ensure that your staff isn't stepping on each other in the different nodes?
Yeah, the good news is when we all come forward like we are now, we've got the opportunity. And exactly the process part, that's what I was telling you about. That is probably the hardest piece of all this. As we're working the training aspect of it is having the discussion up front. And then what we're doing now is really we're running daily OPTs on those, the crosstalk across all the mission command systems, and really to ensure that as we're figuring it out, as we're looking at the team and saying, okay, what are you doing? What am I doing? And we're not doing it super well yet. I mean, there's plenty of times where the 2 forward, 2 rear, or step on each other. But as we look towards the training part of this, we're writing this playbook in route. But the biggest thing is we're capturing those lessons. As we capture that stuff, write it down, get it locked in, that becomes the process that we can follow. So really, we think about the warfighter will have a that actually formalizes exactly what you're talking about. To kind of experiment with it here, train on it in June, and then really try to lock that stuff in by the warfighter, which is in October for us. Yeah, thanks for the question, though. Thank you very much. I'm glad I answered all the questions up front. But I'll stand by. I'm in the global. If folks have other additional feedback they'd like to present. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time today, and I know General Brunson does as well.